What can a biblical perspective teach us about investing today? Stay tuned. Welcome to this week's edition of NoteSchool TV, episode number 225. And yes, we have a great guest today that we're going to talk about. Well, we're going to talk about his book. You guys know this fella, and Eddie will introduce him in just a second. Before we get started, let's do a few things. Let's do some housekeeping. Number one, make sure and hit that like button. Share it with your friends, your relatives, your business associates, everybody you know. Number two, if you haven't subscribed to the NoteSchool TV channel, make sure and do that. And number three, hit that bell notification. Yep, bing, go ahead and hit it so that you'll be advised when we're about to go live. When? Every Wednesday at 11:05 Central Time. If you'd like to know more about what we do at NoteSchool, simply go to noteschool.com/TV. And with that, I want to bring on, our chief visionary officer, founder of NoteSchool, all-around good guy, Mr. Eddie Speed.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate the introduction. We have a special show every week, but I believe today this show is very special. Today we have a guest. This guy is actually our chief counsel for NoteSchool. He has been my attorney and advised me through many business transactions and legal dealings over many years. I respect him as an attorney, but I more respect him as a person. And today you're going to get to find out about a book he's written. And it is a book on business ethics and how to do business correctly. And nobody else is more qualified than him. You guys welcome my friend, Mr. Jeff Watson.
Hello, Eddie.
How you
Pleasure
doing,
to see
Counselor?
you. Oh, it has been a fun day, my friend. It has been a fun day. Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you heard me say in the introduction, you have definitely guided me through a lot of things, and you and I have seen a lot of things in business together where people didn't make good decisions, Jeff.
Can people see my eyes rolling?
Yeah.
Can they see my eyes rolling? Oh,
So,
Eddie.
So we're really excited. We're really excited. By the way, guys, this book is already a bestseller. Okay. So we're not talking about something that hadn't already had success. This book has had tremendous success. And Jeff, I want to go back to the beginning. Like, what prompted you to write this book, Boaz on Business?
Oh, Eddie, that's a good question. And I'm just gonna open it up and be vulnerable. I went through a really miserable time in my life a while back. And Eddie, you were there. You were there. In fact, you were sitting at one of the dinner tables on the cruise when it all came apart. You knew. You and Martha had a front row seat, and you guys have been fantastic friends, great supporters. Appreciate your concern, your prayers the whole time. I went through a horrible time in my life, and I knew that I needed to become a better man. And I dug into the Word of God. I dug into the Bible, and I love history. So I was reading the historical books in the Old Testament, and I got to the Book of Ruth. And as I'm reading through the Book of Ruth, which is a fantastic history book, even though it's only 4 chapters, great insight in history, I started to see a blueprint for how this man by the name of Boaz, we're told he's a mighty man of wealth. I began to see the blueprint of how he ran his business. And as it started to sink in more and more, I started digging more and more, and I started prying in between the words and so on. And I started just picturing out what it would look like. And that was the beginning of the book, Boaz on Business, because here's a man that we know lived. We see him cited and named many times in Scripture, and he had a very influential role in history. But he ran a fantastic business, Eddie. He ran a fantastic business. And we'll talk more about that. But that's what got me started on this. So, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your personal situation. And I was there to see you live through that. And you handled it with dignity. It was painful. but you handled it with great dignity. And I always have appreciated that about you. And then you and I have been in a lot of business dealings together, and we have a lot of business friends and associates, right? So we know a lot of the same people. Anything in your background that really you feel like qualifies you uniquely to write this book?
Yeah, there's two things that actually, and it kind of merges together. A lot of people don't know this, but my undergrad degree in order to get into law school was from a small Bible college with a degree in biblical studies. Okay. And so then as I became practicing law, I saw how people would run businesses. I saw how law firms were run, and I wasn't impressed. And then as I transitioned more and more away from courtroom litigation over medical issues and, injuries and things like that, I transitioned more as I became more and more of an investor. I started seeing more and more about how businesses were run and how I needed to run mine. And then, Eddie, I started seeing how people do real estate deals and how they run businesses. And I got to tell you, I've been involved in a lot of different business structures and situations and so on. And the vast majority of them, Eddie, they don't make it. They don't make it. And there's a list of reasons why. And so then it was like, okay, you see the problems these businesses have, Jeff. You help them with it when they want to hear from you. You try and fix it when it's too late. Why not get in the front of it? Why not talk about some of these things? And maybe it'll help some people not make the mistakes that I see too many other people make, And Eddie, I got to tell you, I've lost count of how many times you or I will see something on social media, screenshot it and send it to each other with, this isn't good. This is not going to age well.
Yeah, sometimes people make claims on Facebook that we know behind the scenes, it doesn't quite look like they're trying to make it seem, right? And you and I think we're believers, and you and I are, we look at things and we look at situations that people make claims and circumstances that aren't always fully represented, right? But that's not our point to judge, but in business, it is our point to be aware.
Well, we have to be, as a steward of the resources that we have been entrusted with, we are required to know the condition of the assets. We're required to pay attention to our flocks, our herds. We're required to do due diligence and do inspection. We're required to count costs and analyze upfront expenditures and see if things work or not. We're required to do that as a steward. That doesn't mean we judge. That doesn't mean we're harsh attacking somebody else who may not have the same acumen or experience that we have. It means that we're supposed to try and encourage, share, bring them alongside. Because, Eddie, you've looked at more seller finance notes than any other human being on the planet. That's what qualifies you to talk about how to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I want to make a point here, Jeff, and I think you make it clear in the book too, but omitting information is the same as lying.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if the whole truth requires no omissions. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And we know a lot of times in business deals, we've seen people omit things and they say, well, I didn't lie to you. No, you did lie. Right.
You did lie. Yep.
Jeff, here's a different direction for you.
Okay.
I've done a lot of teaching myself. And I've learned that the teacher learns more than the student sometimes, a lot of times. What did you learn? What did you learn in this process of writing this book about yourself?
I learned two huge things. Number one, I learned who I needed to become. I learned what kind of a man I needed to really become in business purposes. And I'll get into a very specific aspect of that. And then the second thing that I learned is I learned just how much I had to improve some of my business practices. Because the number one problem in any one of my three businesses is me. I'm the problem. And Eddie, I remember you saying the same thing we're sitting in a mastermind and you're going into a really crazy season. This was back when your boys were still in high school playing football, and they, Friday Night Lights is a big thing. I mean, your boys were talented, gifted athletes, and you were like, I'm here to make sure that I'm home to see them play. And you've had the same challenge with your daughter, with the amazing professional success that she's had in the ballet world, And so you understand that you, as a business owner, you have a personal life, and you've got to figure out how to manage it all together. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes we're so tempted because of some successes in business to not pay attention to the most important thing, and that's your personal life.
Yep.
Right.
And let's face it, it's a very typical thing for men that we're good at something, so we keep doing what we're good at. Yeah. Oh, I'm good at flipping houses. Oh, I'm good at buying and selling notes. Oh, I'm good at doing deals. I'll keep doing that and ignore all the other areas where I need to grow and improve. And so writing this book showed me where I needed to grow, where I needed to improve, where I needed to really have the blunt conversation with myself of, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to change. And we've made some changes, and I'll be happy to share one of them. And I think it's my pet peeve and my number one sugar stick when I would talk to entrepreneurs about Boaz on Business, what they learn out of that book. So, I mean, I'll just do it this way, Eddie. I learned that I am a horrible communicator with my team. I did not do a good job explaining why I got to the decisions I got to my team. You know how it is, Eddie. You've got this complex problem that you're wrestling with for 3 or 4 days. You're thinking about it all the time. You're driving down the road, whatever it is you're doing, and you come up with a solution. And it's like that moment occurs. You got an idea. You got a plan. You know what you're going to do. So you walk into your office, you walk into your team, and you say, hey, on such and such, here's what we're going to do. And you get that glazed over look in everybody's eyes like, what are you talking about? We have no idea what you mean, because they were not there for the 39 hours of mental dialogue.
You're starting in the middle of the book, right?
Yes, exactly. So you've got to. So what I had to do was I had to stop, literally pull up a chair and sit down and talk. Set the stage, explain the situation, explain the options, explain the analysis, and then talk about the outcome.
Yeah.
And when I started doing that, it changed. It changed because the level of buy-in, the level of trust, the level of follow-through just poured right out of it because they knew what all been thought through. They knew why we were doing this now, and they could understand the pieces that I didn't explain, the little gap I left. They figured it out, and they would run with it. And it worked really well.
What you're describing, Jeff, is the most important role of a visionary. And a visionary's job with his team, their most important role, as I'm told, is you got to cast the vision. That's your number one job, is to cast the vision where your team can see it.
Not only can your team see it, but they got to buy in and believe it. So let me give you an example. If we go back into the book Boaz on Business and we go back into the book of Ruth, we can see that in Ruth chapter 2, Boaz shows up at the barley field. His crew's already there. He shows up. There's respectful greeting by everybody. Then he looks and sees what's going on. He looks at his overseer and he points at Ruth and he says, who is that? And his overseer, so we've got a chain of command, we've got organizational hierarchy and the whole bit. His overseer, in answer to a specific question, gives him a detailed, fact-specific answer. Which that's what you want from your reports, right? The people that you ask questions of, you want detailed answers, which means you've trained them to know these things. Boaz trained his overseer as to who he would permit to glean on his fields and who he wouldn't, and know who's there and keep track of them. So when the report the overseer gives to Boaz there in Ruth chapter 2, we see all of that come out. And then Boaz makes a decision where he's changing the trajectory of the company. And he just doesn't say it one time, Eddie. He just doesn't cast the vision and articulate it one time. He says it to the overseer. He says it to Ruth. He says it to the other men that are working there. He says it to the ladies that are working there. And then he stays and sits down and has lunch with everybody and shows them, not just by his words, but by his actions, how the company was going to treat this foreign stranger who is now the daughter-in-law of his cousin's, of his late, cousin's wife. Mm-hmm. So now he's showing by his words, by his actions, what's going to happen. So he articulates the vision multiple times in just a few hours.
Jeff, if you were going to summarize your vision for people reading this book, what is your vision for them?
My vision for them is twofold. It's to gather some principles of how to better operate their business. Mm-hmm. But I also want to give them hope, because here's the other big aspect. When we study the historical record of that time in which Boaz was a grain farmer in a town of Bethlehem, just a little south of Jerusalem in the land of Israel, that was a really chaotic time. There was no strong central form of government. There was a whole lot of religious confusion. There was a tremendous amount of moral apostasy, decay, and so on. There were famines. There were food shortages. There were droughts. There were people selling everything and leaving. So there were foreign invasions and other problems. And so there was this really economically chaotic, socially disruptive thing going on. Does it kind of sound like America right about now, Eddie? Like what we've kind of...
I was thinking,
Does it sound like the last 10, 15 years, 20 years of what we've seen?
I was thinking about knowing you were in the process of writing this book and finishing this book. And then all of a sudden we've had the terrible hurricane situation in Florida and the Carolinas, right? We've had the terrible fires in LA, right?
Yep.
I mean, like, you were writing this book and finishing this book, and that hadn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, God knew it was going to happen.
God knew it was going to happen. Yeah. I mean, I think I started writing this book after the virus. But I started writing this book while we were in the midst of an administration that was just kind of like uncertain of what it was doing. And we had a House divided. We had Republicans here and we had Democrats there, and we had division, strife, chaos, and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here's what I discovered. In spite of all of that chaos, these particular business principles that Boaz was displaying worked. And you're going to say, well, Jeff, how do you know it worked? Well, pay attention, folks. When you get to the fourth chapter of the Book of Ruth, there's only 4 chapters in it. The book ends long after all the events had happened, because the book talks about how Boaz and Ruth get married. They have a child by the name of Obed. Obed has a son by the name of Jesse. Jesse has a bunch of sons, his youngest of which is the man that we now reverentially refer to as King David. And David, while he was a young shepherd, had access. Listen to me carefully here. While he was a young shepherd taking care of the family flock, he had access to a handwritten copy of the Old Testament books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. You're not, the only way you get that at that time is you were a family wealthy enough to hire a scribe to do that. And those books that David had while he studied them, while watching the sheep, formed who he was, that we see throughout the book of Psalms and elsewhere. Formed who he is. So he was identified in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. And today, King David is still revered throughout the world. So yeah, Boaz did a good job. He handed it down. He did a good job.
All right. So continuing with your vision, what do you think that somebody gets out of this book that otherwise they might not recognize, and particularly if they're running a note business or a real estate business or something related to our industry? Because obviously you have a lot of business and investing and legal experience in people in our world. What are they going to get out of this?
So Eddie, they're going to get out of this, and I think it's found right in the portion of the book where it's you and I talking about these concepts, because you were kind enough to read an advanced draft. You were kind enough to let me interview you. And Eddie, you nailed it. You encapsulated it so well when you told the story of your father-in-law, that he was always thinking, what will this deal look like in 20 years?
Yeah, he did.
And Eddie, that is the mindset that we have to have in this business. We buy a note, we originate a note, we buy a partial, we sell a partial. We're thinking of decades of payments, folks. We're thinking 20 years out, or we should be. So that's the thing takeaway. And I want people to understand that we can see that Boaz, by his actions, as documented in chapter 4 of the Book of Ruth, and I explained this in the book Boaz on Business. And Eddie, I've just dropped a link to the book in the chat just so people can find it when they need it.
Yes, sir.
That Boaz was a long-term real estate investor, and he deployed capital in a very strategic way long-term. And I'm going to elaborate on this for just a minute, because this is a really beautiful perspective to think about it from the note space. They didn't have notes and mortgages like we have today, okay? But they had clearly documented real estate transactions, and they had property rights that went with it. And one of those property rights was a right of redemption, that if a man would sell farmland, there was a period of time in which he or a family member of his could redeem it or buy it back. Kind of like you've got the note and you're going to get yourself title to the property through owning the note. That's what Boaz did. But when he exercised that right, it wasn't for him. It was for his future mother-in-law, Naomi. So he exercised a legal right off that we'd have it as a recorded instrument, an option or a note or whatever.
Right.
He exercised that right of redemption so that Naomi would then own a piece of land again. Naomi would pass away eventually, and that land would be inherited by Ruth. Now, Ruth was now married to Boaz, but she was much younger than Boaz. So the ultimate beneficiary of that transaction was actually Boaz's child, Obed. So he was thinking 2 generations and 20 years out when he made that deal.
You're taking it from, the theory of how do you make long-term decisions, and you're looking into an important Bible story where God showed us how you position yourself to make good decisions for your family, for your future, for your legacy.
Yep.
Right? He blessed Boaz to have those skills. He blessed Boaz to have those assets, but Boaz had to make some good decisions around those blessings.
Yep. And I'll give you an example of some of the decisions Boaz made. Let's think of the example of his work ethic. Boaz is very fluent, mighty man of wealth. Doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. But there, in a critical part of the story, at a critical time in the business, he's there sleeping at the threshing floor on a sack of grain, because that's where he needed to be as the leader of the business. Wasn't comfortable, wasn't glamorous, but that's where he needed to be, so he was there.
So, Jeff, you had a clear mission, you had a vision when you wrote this book, right? You've represented us, our companies. You've been deeply involved with, as we've said, a lot of people that you and I mutually know and otherwise.
Yeah.
What did you feel like the importance of this long-term thinking that you keep touching back to? What do you think how do you think that affects that this book speaks directly to how we're making investment decisions?
So I'm going to answer that question two ways. Okay. I'm going to pick on a guy that you and I both really like and respect by the name of Max Keller. Max has gotten so very good at providing clarity in whatever message is being articulated by you, by Joe. He helps me. He helps so many other people. Max provides clarity in his communication, because the two things I see in the environment that you and I operate in the elbows that we rub with and the people we see, there are two things that people have that they need to fix in their businesses. Number one is they absolutely totally suck at communication. They're not clear about what they mean. They're not consistent with the messaging. I know I'm not. I know, Eddie, I know I'm a rolling train wreck on that topic. But anyhow, that's one of the things that I see, and that's one of the things you and I see. We see, I mean, this week you're all about this type of deal. Next week you're all about this type of deal. I mean, we've seen it all. Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing is, too many people in our industry, too many of the people that you and I sit down next to or sit across the table from or whatever it is, they're not thinking with a long-term strategic view.
Yeah.
They're thinking about covering payroll for the next cycle. They're thinking about this quarter. They're thinking about the next deal. They're so reactionary that they're not planning ahead and saying, how can I structure my business activities to do this once, maybe twice, and collect a bunch of payments off of it? So to break it down into a really good example, they're so interested in brokering a note to make a fee rather than, is there a way I can buy the note, sell a partial, and collect a bunch of payments?
Yeah. It's the flipping mentality in real estate for sure.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time. And, I really appreciate the fact, Jeff, that you had a very creative approach through God's word, right? Through a Bible story, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is Captain Obvious, but apparently not everybody does. God actually knows how to run a business too.
Well,
amongst everything else in the world.
So I'm gonna comment on that in just a minute, because I completely agree with you. And this is where I am right now. So Boaz's great grandson David wrote, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, standeth in the way of sinners, or sitteth in the seat of the scornful." Another verse later, he goes, "But he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper." That's Psalm chapter 1, verses 1 and 3. And I think that when David wrote that, he was reflecting upon the stories he'd been told about his great grandfather Boaz.
That's
because
correct.
that man definitely is a huge figure in Israel, in the history of Israel. But without Boaz, we wouldn't have David. Without David, we wouldn't have Solomon. Without David and Solomon, what would we have? Just think about that. So we have, God gave me the opportunity to write a book. God has really blessed it, because Eddie, I got to tell you, I was shocked that we hit the bestseller as fast as we did. I mean, a best-selling new release. And I've done some research on this, and I have found out this is the average, Eddie. This is just the average. The average book, like what I just wrote, and I had some fantastic help from my amazing assistant, Debbie. Without her, it could never have happened. And the publisher, Rob Onspach, solid. Without him, it wouldn't have happened. But the average author that puts a book on Amazon this way sells 200 copies in the first year. We sold 200 copies in the first 3 weeks. We've sold 400 in 6-7 weeks. We have sold 400 copies in 6-7 weeks. So we doubled what the average book does, and we did it in 7 weeks.
Well, I just want to compliment you, your entire support team. I'm honored that you interviewed me. I really am. I would have done it for anything, but now that I see the impact that the book is having, and really just some life experiences that I was given. Like I wouldn't take credit for any of my life experiences other than that's just the path that I went down, and that's the things that I saw. And so, but I just can't say enough, Jeff, that I think the principles of the book, whether you consider yourself a deep spiritual person, or whether you consider yourself not spiritual, right? If you believe there's God and you believe that God created everything, he also knows the most about business as he does about everything, right? And you think back, and that's an inspired word of a story about a guy that's showing us a path that here's the right way to do it. Jeff, people want to be ethical business people. People want to be solid leaders. People want to be visionaries. People want to be good communicators. But sometimes we have to have some definition so that we can achieve that at the highest level. I believe that this book is an example of how you can do that.
Well, if it's from the how-to perspective, I really appreciate that. And I've got to say this. I think it's very fitting that a concept that you learned from your father-in-law, Mr. Shoemake, gets to be repeated and shared through the book Boaz on Business because of what you shared in that interview. I think that's fitting. I really do. I think that's just a testament to, I mean, I never got a chance to meet him, just a testament to the man who your father-in-law was and how you've continued to perpetuate and practice what he taught you, you know?
Third generation note buying business. My father-in-law's been dead for 27 years. So, you know, but I have tried to honor the smart things he taught me and repeat those. And you obviously are helping, you know, perpetuate that. And you're doing it with clarity in this book. Jeff, you have given a great contribution to our industry. I challenge you, if you're listening to this interview, go pick up the book Boaz on Business because it's really, really good, and it's not a long read, but it's a smart read, and it will do something that I think will change your direction. So, Jeff, on behalf of the industry and people that have a little gray hair and want legacy and want to go teach people to go do good business, I believe you've made a great contribution to our industry. We are grateful and we thank you for it. And for you guys in the audience, I think it is terrific that you have the availability of getting this and getting it in a concise manner, but a powerful manner.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the truth remains the truth, no matter if it was 3,000 years ago or today, on how to treat people, organize a business, handle negotiations, and plan for contingencies. We cover all that in the book on Boaz on Business. The truth remains the truth, and it doesn't change. And that's one of the powerful things, and that I enjoyed extracting it out and applying it, seeing how I had struggled in my businesses, seeing how some of the other businesses I'd been in had succeeded wildly and some had failed horribly. And so you start looking for what are those differences.
Yeah.
And it's not the people. It's usually not the people. It's usually the how-to knowledge that's available at the time. Yeah.
Well, it is a great industry contribution. It is wonderful that you've done it, and I am so thrilled to share it with whoever we can influence, and challenge you that it is a book well worth reading and well worth getting those concepts aligned in our head, because as you said, just going down the path without a plan is not going to lead you to where you got to get to.
Exactly. So true. You got to be thinking 20 years ahead. You got to be thinking 20 years ahead and ask yourself, what must I do and what must be true to get to that desired result? Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Watson, he is author of the book Boaz on Business. He is a very smart investor, real estate investor. He is a very smart lawyer. He's a great guy. He's a man that leads with ethics and with purpose. And I think this book is a good blueprint for us all. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Jeff, I'm going to challenge our audience to read this book. It will make a difference.
And I will say this. At Summer Summit, I would love to spend an hour autographing books that people bring. I would love to do that.
Let's
I would
do
love
that.
to do that.
I love that. All right. Joe, I'm going to let you close us out. Jeff, thank you so much. What a great message today, and we really appreciate it.
All right. Peace. Watson out.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. Thanks so much, Jeff, for bringing that to our attention. Great book, by the way, Boaz on Business. Make sure you go in and grab that. And, well, we will see you same place, same time next week. When is that? 11:05 Central Time on Wednesday. And again, if you want to know more about what we do at Note School, simply go to noteschool.com/TV. Thanks. We'll see you next week.